Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk About It. I am your host, Taylor Nolan, and this week we are going to be diving into the topic of scoliosis. I recently shared on Instagram that it was my 12-year anniversary from my scoliosis surgery, and was just so overwhelmed by all the feedback from all of you, and figured I should share a little bit more about this story on here with you guys. I am back in Seattle now, but Kit is not here. He's actually in LA. But I have a very close friend and wonderful guest here with me today. She is a practicing therapist here in Seattle. She's an LMFT, and someone I met fairly early on when I moved to Seattle, and just felt a very strong connection with. So thank you so much for being here, and welcome, Amira, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So we met at like a friend's party and connected on the fact that we were both counselors and in the same field. And that was super, I think, interesting and very bonding to feel. And then we also realized that we both have had the same surgery. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah. I remember when I first met you at the party, it was so surprising because nobody else in our larger group of friends seems to be in our profession or affiliated with it.
Yeah.
And so that felt special. And then when I learned that you also had scoliosis repair surgery, it was like a double whammy.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad to be here and to have met you.
Yeah, me too. I'm super happy to have you in my life, and you're always someone that I really hope and try to make sure that when I am in town that we can get together. And there's so many bonding conversations just therapy-wise. And so probably have you back on the podcast again at some point to talk about some of those. Do you want to share a little bit about kind of what population you usually do work with, just so people kind of have a little bit of a background on what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I have two offices, one in downtown Seattle and one in Bellevue. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. And in Seattle, I work mostly with individuals, adult individuals, on issues relating from anxiety, stress, depression, loneliness, or, I don't know, just kind of navigating like interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
In Bellevue, though, I work a lot more with adolescents and families.
Okay.
Similarly on those issues, but also a lot related to academic performance, family conflict, and kind of just trying to figure out how to be an adult.
Yeah, that's hard stuff. No one likes to be an adult.
Yeah. It's something that, I mean, as an adult, I can still relate to in many respects.
Yes.
And so it's great to work with both populations and to kind of get a view of the family from different angles.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm definitely hoping to have you on again to kind of talk more therapy stuff, but very much appreciate your openness and willingness to come on the pod today to talk about things a little bit more personal.
Yeah. It's my pleasure to be here and talk about something that besides talking to doctors about, I've never talked to another person who's undergone the same surgery.
Yeah. Yay. Well, I'm excited that we're going to talk about it. So for those of you wondering what scoliosis is where your spine will start to curve. So it's, everyone has kind of a natural curve to their spine that doesn't impact their health. That's just normal. But then where scoliosis can start to get really severe is where the curve really starts to have an intense curve. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah. So one of the ways that doctors will determine if it's scoliosis rather than just the natural curve of the spine is the extent of the degree of the curve. And so many people, actually probably more than most people think, have scoliosis. Yeah. It's just slightly more than that natural curvature, but not nearly enough to require treatment or maybe even to be noticed.
Yeah. And so I guess I kind of want to go through the basics and some of the questions people would ask who weren't familiar with scoliosis and how our experience and our stories went. So, first, how would someone realize that they have more of a severe case of scoliosis? How did you come to the realization?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a little bit of a two-part question because when I was first diagnosed with it, I didn't have any symptoms or understanding of what it was that I was being diagnosed with. As maybe was true for you, and if it's still done today, I was diagnosed in 5th grade when each person in my class was brought into a private room and asked to bend over, which is a pretty...
Bend over and touch your toes.
Yeah, and I think they probably mentioned the word scoliosis in testing, but it was like this obscure sort of mysterious thing that I had no kind of understanding of. And either directly after that or maybe a letter was sent home to my parents, I learned that I had this mysterious thing.
Yeah, I mean, mine, I think it is pretty typical in early adolescence that this is diagnosed. And for me, it was 6th grade, 6th or 7th. It was 7th grade. And we had the same thing, went into the room, did the thing. And they said, I had a normal curve. And it wasn't until maybe about 5 or 6 months after that we had gotten out early for some early dismissal thing, and I was wearing a tube top, and I was in South Carolina and had bent over, and my girlfriend was like, oh my God, like you have a hump on your back, and was like, I think you have scoliosis. Like my grandma had that. You're going to have to get surgery. And I was like, wait, what? What are you talking about? I was like, no, I'm fine. But she could see on the lower left side of my back where like my spine was poking out and there was like a hump. And she was like, that doesn't look right. And that was kind of how it all started. Like went to my mom and was like, Mom, like Hannah says I'm going to need surgery and what am I going to do? And I was a little bit of like over dramatic at that age.
Of course.
Still today sometimes. And my mom didn't believe me at all. And then we finally went to the doctor and they're like, yeah, you have a severe case of scoliosis.
Wow. Yeah. So from the get-go for you, it was this public social thing.
Yeah.
And for me, that didn't come until much later, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But similarly, after I had done that test and my mom found out, it was also about 6 months before I went and got x-rays.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think that was kind of a crucial 6 months because I was just entering middle school, had just started puberty, and so was growing. And when I finally got those first x-rays, I learned that I had a 37-degree curve between my shoulders and then like a compensatory curve lower in my spine.
Yeah. I wish I had remembered what my curves were, the degrees. I don't remember what they were, and the paperwork is packed away somewhere real deep. But yeah, I had a curve going to the right on my upper spine, and then on the lower it was going to the left, so it was like an S shape. Yeah, same here. Yeah, I think you brought up a good point where you were going into middle school and were starting puberty, and that was a big kind of determining factor too in whether or not you get surgery for treatment or you do some other forms of treatment like a back brace, where I was about to turn 13. And so, I was still kind of at the beginning of puberty. And, I think sometimes people postpone treatment to see how their spine is going to continue to grow throughout adolescence. But for some people, like for us, it was pretty severe earlier on, and that was required. So guys, I want to take a quick break. You've heard me talking about Flex for the last few weeks. I'm so happy to hear that so many of you guys are just as obsessed with it as I am. So for those of you who haven't heard me talk about this amazing product before, Flex is a new period product called a menstrual disc that completely replaces tampons, pads, and menstrual cups. It lasts for 12 hours and is full body safe, reduces cramps, and the crazy thing is that you can actually have sex during your period while wearing it. A lot of you have been writing in telling me how you will never go back to tampons again after using it, and I 100% agree. I've got to be honest with you. I was a little bit hesitant to talk about my period with you guys since there's so much stigma around it and it's something that not a lot of people feel comfortable talking about. But I realized that the more we as women talk about it, the more we can get access to better products. I was actually super inspired when I heard the story of how Flex was created. The two women who founded Flex realized that there hadn't been any innovation in period products since the 1930s, and that the products we were using were actually causing a lot of negative symptoms we associated with our periods. Cramps, odor, bloating, infections, just to name a few. So they decided that we all deserve better, and that's how Flex was born. Today, I'm so proud to be a Flex partner and excited to share a 3-month trial for only $12 and free shipping. Just go to IHateTampons.com and use my code Taylor to try Flex for 3 months for only $12. Now back to the show.
So in kind of anticipation of this podcast, I had done some research about just how common this is. Mm-hmm. And what I found was that about 2 to 3% of adolescents will be diagnosed with scoliosis. But of that percentage, only about 30% of them will need treatment. And that can be, we're talking like non-surgical treatment, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. Mm-hmm. Of that 30%, only 10% actually require surgery.
Yeah.
So we are truly in a minority, I think.
And that's where it really, blew me away to see all of the messages that I had received from everyone and all the comments from people who related in whether it was the same surgery or similar curvature or just, knowing someone that had it. When I went through it, I didn't know anyone. Mm-hmm. who had it.
Yeah, same here. And after I got those initial x-rays done, I still really had no understanding of what was going to literally take shape in my life or my body. Yeah. And it ended up being like quite an insular process for the next couple of years. I tried all sorts of different treatments before finally realizing I needed to have the surgery. Yeah. And that whole time, none of my friends knew what was going on.
That's so hard. Had you communicated with any of them about what was going on? Was it something you were open with?
So it was kind of like a perfect storm of factors. Middle school, of course, is hard for any number of reasons anyway. Yeah. When I started 6th grade, I started at a new school, and it was a private, small school where my mom was the school counselor. Yeah. And I remember just feeling so insecure about who I was and why I was there. Mm-hmm. Most of the other students had gone to school with each other since preschool. Yeah. And so when I learned that I was going to be getting treatment for scoliosis, I thought, oh my gosh, I can't afford to tell people about this. Mm-hmm. It's just going to further isolate me. Yeah. And so I just kept it in, which I don't recommend. By the way, it is not helpful or healthy to a young person's self-esteem. Mm-hmm. But I was doing the best I could in that time. And that's really all I knew, all I knew what to do.
Yeah. And now you mentioned when we spoke before this that your brother and your mom had experiences with it. So you weren't alone in that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this was an interesting thing. And I'm only now still kind of piecing it together. So one of the things that I learned, again, in my preliminary research is that about 30% of adolescents who have scoliosis will have a family member, like a immediate sibling or parent who has it. Yeah. At the time I was diagnosed, I think maybe one of the reasons my mom acted relatively quickly, 6 months, but was likely because she had surgery for scoliosis when she was much younger. Mm. And it was a much different surgery than we have today, thank goodness, because she ended up being in a true body cast as part of her recovery from that surgery. Yeah. And so after I had gotten those initial x-rays and was undergoing treatment, for about 1.5 years, it was just kind of something she and I navigated together. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until about 1 year before I got my surgery when I learned that my older brother had also been diagnosed with it, and it had progressed to such a degree over 6 months that he needed surgery.
Yeah. And at what age was that for him?
I was 14 when I got it, so he would have been 16.
Okay, yeah.
And he ended up getting it 6 months before I did, which was really helpful to kind of have an older sibling sort of pave the way.
And to kind of get like a really close-up look of what surgery looks like and what recovery looks like. I had no idea what any of that would look like. So I can imagine where that would have been kind of helpful.
Yeah. And thinking back on it, I think it was ultimately, probably more helpful than I can articulate now. At the time that I got my surgery, though, I had done so many alternative treatments that I think I was just ready. I was ready for the surgery. I was ready to stop trying things to no avail. And I was ready to stop kind of feeling like a guinea pig for these different type of treatments that alternative medical providers wanted me to try.
Yeah. What kind of treatments were those that you were trying before surgery?
Oh boy. Okay, so let's think about this. Okay, I had the original x-rays done in the spring of my 6th grade year. And fairly immediately, I think I started chiropractic and massage. I had an incredible chiropractor who really ended up feeling more like a family member to me than just a medical provider. And he was also really creative and passionate about alternative methods of treating scoliosis.
Yeah.
Now, just to be clear, this was true at the time, and it's definitely still true today. There doesn't seem to be any real evidence, research-backed evidence that these methods work.
Yeah.
But, at age 11, my mom was really concerned about just jumping into surgery. And so she thought, we have time to try these at least.
Yeah.
So my original curve was 37. And at the time that I got the surgery, it had progressed to 57, I believe. So during the time in between that, I did chiropractic, massage. Yeah. I used a weighted tennis racket that I would use with my left hand to try and pull my spine into greater alignment.
Yeah.
I'd also used a weighted head weight that was like basically like a headband that you would wear like when working out that just had a weight on my forehead. And that was to encourage a greater curve in my neck that would hopefully kind of carry down to my spine.
Yeah.
I also used something that I called the wobbly chair. And it's essentially like a bobblehead doll where the head part is the seat cushion. And I don't actually know what that was supposed to do.
I've never heard of that.
Something that would perhaps align my hips.
Yeah.
Or increase my core strength. I also used different like foam pillows for my neck to try and again like encourage that neck curvature.
Yeah.
Perhaps the weirdest thing that I did though, it's eclectic and there's maybe some research to support. I don't entirely know, but it was to practice positive visualization. And so my mom got me this velvet rope, like just a typical velvet rope from Michael's.
Yeah. And
I would practice letting the rope kind of like lay slack and then pulling it taut so it became straight. And the hope, you can kind of see where this would go, mind over matter.
Yes.
So suffice it to say, none of those really worked.
Yeah. And that, especially at that young of an age, that's a lot to take on health-wise. And that I imagine was a little exhausting.
It was exhausting just in terms of the number of appointments. I think in middle school, I was going to a chiropractor a couple times a week.
Oh, yeah. One
thing that I didn't mention, and this was perhaps the biggest preventative treatment we tried, was the brace.
Yes, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. I don't think it's any accident that initially slipped my mind.
Yes. So for me, I didn't have time. They were like, a brace isn't going to do anything at this point. Wow. So I begged and pleaded to just have the brace, and I didn't want surgery. I remember sitting in the doctor's office and telling my mom, like, again, I was a bit dramatic at the time, but it felt very real for me. It was very real. And I looked at her and I said, Mom, I would literally rather die than get this surgery.
Wow.
I was very scared.
Yeah, and impassioned and committed.
Yes, very.
That is
I
so
was like,
interesting.
this is a very intense surgery. I mean, they're going to cut me open from my neck down to my butt and open my back. Like, I was like, no.
Yeah.
I would rather die, Mom.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally see why someone in their early adolescence, or really a person of any age, would have that response.
Yeah, and I've talked about this a little bit on the Being Biracial episode about my middle school years living in South Carolina. And I mean, I had a few years at that point. I was, at like the end of 7th, maybe it was 8th grade. So I had some friends at that point, but it was still similar to you. I was the new girl. I was struggling with like racial identity at the time, dealing with bullying already. And then having to be like, okay, now I'm going to come back and have this surgery. I'm going to have these poles in my back, these rods in my back, and be super straight. And we'll get into recovery in a little bit, but yeah, it's a lot to take on at that young of an age, both with socializing and with, figuring out your own identity.
Yeah. And you bring up a really good point that there were, for you, cultural factors on top of cultural factors that made this a more complex and personal and kind of insecure experience for you. For me, the prospect of getting the brace, I really had no idea what it was until it arrived in the mail. And I have never been more shocked and scared and concerned than when I saw it.
Yeah.
I think I had it so it was in my possession, and it was supposed to be used for about 6 months in my 7th grade year. And the reason that's a really specific time frame is that I remember when it came in the mail, you're kind of coached on how to use it. And the hope is that you'll eventually work your way up to like something like 21 hours of the day in the brace. So really you are living in it.
Yeah, that is what I remember the doctor telling me. If I didn't do the surgery and if I did do the brace, I would literally have to wear it 24 hours a day because my curves were so severe. Yeah.
And same for me at that point. It was this risk that, okay, I had just started puberty. I'd gotten my first period, I think the year before. So I'm still growing. We need to get this controlled before it gets out of hand.
Yeah.
And so when I first saw it, I was really kind of alarmed by how much of my torso it covered, how thick it was. I mean, I think I was thinking of like the back braces that my dad would sometimes wear when working out.
Yeah.
Like that elastic band that's only a few inches, maybe kind of like a corset. This is kind of like a knight of armor. Yeah.
And so you did end up wearing that.
Kind of. So I saw it. I was terrified.
Yeah.
Since you start out doing it for so few hours a day, I just tried wearing it like after school, and it was difficult. It's not inconspicuous.
Yeah, I remember I hadn't seen it before, like talking about it with the doctor, so I had no idea what I was talking about. But he was saying like, this is, it's going to show through your clothes when you wear it, and you might end up wearing like baggier clothes. And again, I mean, I'm in South Carolina; it's really hot.
Oh yeah, of course.
So I could understand where it's like, oh yeah, that's actually going to be a huge kind of almost burden in your life of having to wear this all the time. And it does kind of make you very much stand out, especially if you're wearing it at school and at that age. It's
totally. So I think I ended up wearing it, or I know I ended up wearing it to school for only one day.
Yeah.
And my school had school uniforms. So in some ways this made it easier. I mean, I still only wore it for one day, but we had sweatshirts, and at that time in like the mid 90s, baggy sweatshirts were really in. And so I wore a baggy sweatshirt over it. And I think for the most part, I had it fairly concealed. But the tightness and the kind of inflexibility of it, it just wrecked my school day. So I ended up taking it off halfway through the school day. And then I like to say I then convinced myself to have a growth spurt.
Yes.
Because fairly soon after, that thing was just too small. And I can no longer wear it. So even though...
Good timing.
Positive visualization does work.
Yes.
Just not in the direction my mom had hoped.
Yes.
Yeah, so at the time when we had to kind of just decide the brace was not an option, I don't think I quite yet knew what that meant for my future. I just knew I couldn't do the brace.
And so what did doctors discuss with you were like the consequences or the alternative if you didn't pursue with treatment at that point, surgery? Like why would someone need to get treatment for scoliosis?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember a lot of doctors talking about just the risks of pain when I get older. And maybe they were kind of simplifying the language because of my age, or maybe I was just kind of overwhelmed with information at those meetings. But they kept saying that this will progress as you get older. It's going to be a tougher recovery then. You're going to have pain. It's much better to do it now.
And did you have any pain at the time?
No. So I was still, this was like almost like a hidden illness that people were telling me I had. That I didn't have any, real data telling me I had.
The doctors told me that I should have been in a lot of pain based on the severity of my curves, and I don't have a very high pain tolerance. So I was like, trust me, if I was feeling pain, I would let you know. I really didn't, I was doing cartwheels and handstands, and I wasn't active in sports, but I was active outside. Playing different games around the neighborhood and all that kind of stuff. And I was basically told, with the severity of the curvature, that my spine would start to move my organs around. And that, and that very, that could impact, my ability to, that it would impact my ability to have children, and that that the pain would grow worse. I had, once my friend Hannah had brought it up that I had scoliosis, we started actually looking at my body a little bit more. And there's a photo I remember where my mom was like, stand up straight. And I was standing up as straight as I could. But my, I think it was one of my shoulders, I don't remember which one, was slightly elevated. And you could see I only had one curve on my hip. And that was always something I was very insecure about. I remember it being like, I only have one curve on my hip, and the other hip is just like straight or was almost like out.
Okay. So from a young age, you started noticing how your body looked different.
Yeah. And that was also part of like, if I didn't get the surgery, that I would essentially become like hunchback if I didn't. And that, I would just, my shoulders would continue to grow uneven. My organs could become damaged. The pain would get really intense. And so it was basically like, you have no choice.
Wow. And what a compelling reason to tell an adolescent to get the surgery. Those aesthetic featers, I think are so big. That was why I couldn't wear the brace.
Especially as young women.
As
growing girls.
Yeah, very much so. So that was kind of what sold you.
Yeah. It was basically I had no choice, and I tried to fight it as much as I could up until it. And then I was just kind of like, okay, I guess this is happening to me. So it was a very hard, it was a tough journey getting to that point.
Yeah. Do you think that that it was somehow necessary or self-soothing for you to kind of take that impassioned fighter, I'm not going to do this stance? Yeah,
in some ways. And I think I was also just kind of hoping that the more I said, I'm not going to do this and that I don't need it, that eventually everyone else would be like, yeah, okay, we can do the back brace then, or we can do these other methods. But it was also just kind of like coming to the terms with the fact that, you know, I did have friends, and, you know, like I said, my girlfriend Hannah had recognized it, and she was very supportive of it. And, you know, my friends came to visit me a bunch afterwards. And just knowing that I did have some of that support made it feel more doable, I guess.
Yeah. So it sounds like kind of from the get-go, what initially motivated you was this thought that you could talk all these other adults into choosing something else.
Yeah. As an only child, you kind of get good at that.
Yeah, sure. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, when I had to contend with kind of this impending surgery, even though I was so happy to not be in the brace, and I was kind of naive thinking like, okay, let's do it.
Yes.
I remember when we were interviewing different orthopedic surgeons, taking the hardest, most rejecting, most like, I don't know, angry teen stance when I first met them.
Yep.
They would often comment on like this evil glare that I would have when they walked into the room. And for anyone who knows me, I'm actually like a quite nice person and
very welcoming person,
people friendly. But I think, you know, one of the things that I have thought about is that like for adolescents who are undergoing something that is so much bigger than anything they've ever had to contend with, right? Structural changes to their body that require massive intervention.
And it feels very invasive.
Yeah, and it is.
Yeah.
Everything from how people talk about your body to what they may need to do to it. I think for me, it was really necessary to feel empowered in some small way, even if it was a bit at odds with my personality, or even if it was a bit even rude. I think I needed to kind of be angry at those doctors initially, because I was just so scared.
We got a message from someone that I kind of want to share here, as it's along the lines of what we're talking about. She wrote and said, I didn't know you had scoliosis. I struggle with this every single day. Sad face. My hips are uneven. My friends and family say nobody notices, but it's all I see when I look in the mirror every day. It's really affected me both physically and mentally. It makes me feel stronger to know that you had it and went through with the surgery. I'm 22 years old and still haven't had it. I'm not sure if I will or not, but thank you anyways.
Wow.
And that just really makes me like feel for her. And I mean, I think for anyone out there who has the curvature and surgery has been suggested as a treatment option, it's not an easy decision to make. And for me, again, at that young of an age, like I think if I were where I'm at now at 24 and had to process this now, that would be a lot. But back then it was kind of still, you know, like my parents are kind of making the main decisions as to my health and, you know, decisions with my doctors and everything. But it does take such it's a physical disease, illness, but it very much impacts you on a mental level. It is, you're right. It felt very invasive to know that people were going to be commenting on your body. And then also for me, the biggest thing was just knowing that, again, I was literally going to be sliced open from my neck down to my butt and, you know, that my body was going to change. And like, how do I respond to that change in my body?
Yeah. That's a great point. Like the age when you are forced to address this can really impact how you do so. That's a really powerful letter that woman sent. And it is such a real complex daily experience. To have big decisions like that made for you when you're an adolescent, I mean, that has some benefits and drawbacks. To contend with those as a young adult, though, in many ways, that's uniquely challenging. And my heart goes out to her.
Yeah. Same. Even just reading all the comments, and I mean, I'm so appreciative and thankful for everyone who did comment and message and just sharing their story, and people were, you know, responding to each other, and that like really made my heart warm. You know, I think there were a lot of people actually who had the surgery and who could kind of relate in some way. So I kind of want to ask a little bit about, what the surgery process was like for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I distinctly remember the night before the surgery. We were in a hotel near Overlake Hospital in Bellevue. Mm-hmm. And I had grown up about 45 minutes south of there. And so being in that hotel, in many respects, felt like this special evening out. Mm-hmm. And I remember my mom said, you can order whatever you want for dinner, which in the past, that would have been like the coolest thing ever. Mm-hmm. But I was nervous.
Yeah.
It was starting to finally resonate with me what I was going to be doing the next day. And I really couldn't enjoy any of what I had.
Yeah.
Which for me told me that this was a big deal, bigger than I had realized before.
Yeah. And for me, honestly, part of the biggest thing was like, what if I die? It's like, what if I don't? And that was kind of where before surgery, when I was like, Mom, I would rather die. Like that was almost like I could die in that surgery, but like I would rather choose to just die on my own in normal life than
on your own terms, whatever that meant to your 13-year-old self.
Yes. And, going in there, like going under anesthesia, like I hadn't done that yet, that was totally foreign to me. And that was always my fear was like, what if I like don't wake up from this? Or like, what if something goes wrong because it's your spine?
Yeah. I have to say, hearing you speak about your experience, I think in many ways you were more mature than I was. I think so. Even though I was a year older, I was 14 when I got it. I felt so detached from it. Yeah. I think maybe like a healthy dose of fear or recognition of how big it is would make sense and maybe even be helpful. It sounds like you got that though. Yeah.
I was very, very fearful. And I think, again, because it's a very rare thing, I think the isolation that comes with it increases the fear. And so I do want to try to make sure that as we talk through the surgery stuff that we're answering some of these questions that you guys had. So this person wrote and said, thank you for sharing your scoliosis post. I have it too, and it is my biggest insecurity. It makes you feel alone and no one else understands your daily struggle. It's nice to know I'm not alone. If you don't mind me asking, how was recovery for you? How long did it take to get back to normal? I wish I got the surgery when I was younger. Now I'm a new nurse and it's hard for me to work. I've been thinking about getting the surgery in a couple years and would love to hear your opinion.
Wow. Another touching and heartwarming.
I know. They all were. Like, as I'm, like, reading them all, I'm just like, I want to, go and, like, have lunch with each person and, like, go through and talk about it. Because it's, again, I didn't know anyone else. And I think for a lot of people commenting, like, they hadn't seen someone else struggle with it.
Yeah. I think that's a great recognition. One of the things that I've heard in these past 2 emails is that people really do feel isolated and they think, just like I did, that they're the only one going through this.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I wanted to come on your podcast and speak about this so much is that when I was a teen, I remember thinking, one day I'm going to grow up and be famous. What for? I had no idea.
Yeah.
But one day I'm going to grow up and be famous and I'm going to talk about this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make it okay to talk about this. And it's going to be just part of daily conversation, just like people would talk about any number of things that they're living with.
Yeah. I'm so thankful that after the surgery, I did have a great amount of support from my friends. And there are definitely times that I have felt isolated or felt very different or felt like I, stuck out with having the surgery and having the rods in. But in that immediate recovery phase, I mean, my recovery went, I think, as smooth as it could have gone.
That's great. That's excellent.
Yeah.
And so what did that look like in terms of time in the hospital, time out of school?
So in the hospital, I was really only in the hospital for about 3 or 4 days. It was very, very quick. And I actually, I remember waking up off the anesthesia and I had The Little Mermaid playing because that was my favorite movie growing up. So I was like, I want you guys to just play Little Mermaid on repeat. So I remember like vaguely waking up and seeing my mom and seeing Little Mermaid playing. And then I was kind of, out of it again. And once I had fully woken up, I had like a bunch of family around me and that felt really nice. And, I don't swallow pills, so they had to give me like all my medication and stuff through the IV or through liquid syringe. And my pain levels in the hospital were like pretty well managed. I had a roommate in my room who had the surgery a few days before me, I think like a week before me actually. And she was struggling a lot. And I don't know the specifics of her surgery, but I know she had, spinal fusion like I did. And it terrified me because she was in such pain. I mean, even just the nurses walking in, she would like start screaming. And I don't know this girl. I don't know like if this was typical for her. I have no idea.
Oh, wow.
But I remember being so thankful that I was not in her position, and like her parents were like arguing a lot, and her mom was like yelling at her, and it was just like very chaotic. And I remember that being like one of the most stressful parts of my recovery in the hospital. But they asked me, I think it was like my second night in the bed, and I'd had my catheter out at that point, and they were like, we can give you a bedpan to go pee, and I was like, no. I want to pee in the toilet. And they were like, well, like you haven't gotten up yet, so like we can't let you do that. And I was like, well, I can get up now. And I was just very determined. I was like, I'm not going pee in this bedpan. You will help me up and I will get out and I will go to the bathroom. And so, it was like the second night. I went pee in the toilet, and that was a great accomplishment. And they, I asked like, when would I be able to go home? And they said, as soon as you walk up the steps. And that was like the third day. And I was like, where are the steps? And I like walked around the building a little bit, and then it was like 4 steps that you had to go up and down twice. And I think it was on my 3rd or 4th day that I accomplished that. One of the really hard parts after the surgery while still in the hospital was the tape. I don't know if you had the tape.
On the back.
On the scar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was this like, medical surgical tape that was, straight down the scar. And before I left, they had to rip it off. And that was the most pain I felt.
Wow. And not take it off, rip it off.
I mean, they like pull it off. And it was like so painful. And I remember like after that, I was like, okay, where are the steps? Where's all this stuff? I want to go home. Yeah. Like I am done with this.
Sure.
And they put like dissolvable tape on that would like dissolve and fall off when I went home. I can still smell the smell of the tape.
Wow. That's a really powerful memory for you.
Yeah.
That last email was a great question about kind of what she could expect and sort of how this goes. Yeah. And from what I read, and I've really used speaking on this podcast as a way to kind of like further educate myself. Most people go through the surgery and recover, a vast majority, incredibly well. It sounds like there could have been some external factors that made your roommate or that other person's situation more difficult.
Yeah. And I did know one other girl in a high school who she had only had a portion. She didn't have like the whole thing done like I did. But she, I think, had some kind of infection afterwards. And so she needed like to get a second surgery or something. I'm not totally sure. But for the most part, anyone else that I have spoken to, which has been not a lot of people, the recovery has gone super well. I mean, I went back to school, I think it was like 3 weeks, maybe 4. Yeah.
Yeah, that was how it was for me as well. I was in the hospital, I believe, for about 5 days. I don't really remember a whole lot of pain in the hospital. I know I had a morphine drip that probably really helped.
Yeah. Yep.
And then I got out of the hospital, and it had been over spring break that I had the surgery. And so I think I was out for another 3 weeks and then went back to school. And fairly quickly, I felt... I mean, I wasn't doing cartwheels or like,
I was really sad about that. I was like, I don't get to do cartwheels or handstands. Like, I thought maybe I'd go into gymnastics. They're like, nope.
Oh, so. Yeah. And those came for me eventually. I think I've even done a back bend, although I don't typically do those. But it was probably, a few months of being in school and having accommodations, like being able to take breaks and walk around if sitting for extended periods of time was difficult.
Having someone like carry your backpack for you. I have that.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Huh. I'm going to write a letter to someone about that. That sounds like a great accommodation, especially for those high school backpacks. But ultimately, it really, it was not sort of a notable time in my life, that recovery.
Yeah. I think one of the big ways that it changed my life with having the surgery was, again, being in South Carolina. It's very warm out. And so I had it in March and March 14th. And then it was like summer. And so wearing bathing suits with my scar when it was that like fresh, I mean, I needed to be careful and it had to be covered up to help with its healing. But just even having shirts where my scar would show or wearing bathing suits in general was such an area of insecurity.
Wow.
And you just feel people staring at you and it was just so, and again, already being like a 13-year-old girl, having people stare at your body. Like I didn't really have curves. I mean, I had really small boobs and it was just, already trying to figure out what your identity looked like and what your, gauging your self-esteem and all of that.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting and quite a different experience or relationship than I had with my scar.
Yeah.
I think I kind of used my scar as a launching pad for this like edgy identity.
Yeah, I could see that.
Maybe it started with glaring at the orthopedic surgeons when they came in, and it turned into like this badass persona I created.
Yeah.
I love to, especially in high school, in high school, make up stories for how I got the scar.
Yeah.
And it just delighted me when I'd fool people. It kind of felt like one way that I was protecting like the vulnerability and also sort of owning this thing that had been done to me. And to this day still, like I like it. I don't mind that it's there. I think it's interesting. And it never ceases to blow my mind how few people ask about it or mention it.
Yeah, I really respect and admire how you took that on. And I think I started to do some of that later on, but certainly the first few years was something I was so embarrassed about. And I wish it had taken on that badass persona sooner, but it really took on this sort of like, I'm really fragile.
Yeah.
Like I felt very like weak and fragile, even though I had this, titanium rod, 2 of them, screwed into my spine. I still felt like I'm this really fragile person. Like I can't do a lot of things. Like I definitely restricted the things that I did. And
even to this day, right? Like you won't ski or.
I don't, I used to not, certain boats. I mean, I already have like seasickness to begin with, so I don't like going on boats unless it's like a kayak or like a actual boat that's like big enough to have like a bathroom kind of thing. Because I'd feel seasick. But I remember going to summers in Iowa with some family, and they had like the speed boats that would be like really choppy, and like I wouldn't do that.
So really protective.
Yeah, I wouldn't do any kind of like roller coasters, but I, again, already don't really like roller coasters, so that kind of worked out. But yeah, I was super protective of my body, and I didn't really go, I mean, before the surgery, I'd play volleyball all the time. I was, very active. And then after that, I was definitely looked at my body as just this very fragile being that I had to really protect.
Wow. And I'm guessing that wasn't because doctors said, don't go on roller coasters, don't go on speedboats.
No. I mean, that was the like for the first few months recovery was like, don't lift 50 pounds and above and all that kind of stuff. But I definitely just started to view myself as like, physically weak.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think it did start to take on a little bit of like a badassness. I think maybe a little bit in college. And, there's always 3 things about me that people are very impressed or shocked or have a strong reaction to about me. 1 is that I don't drink. 2 is being half black, half white. And 3 is the scar. But those are the 3 things that like make me unique, that make me stand out. The scar was one. And I never made up like cool stories. I was just like...
Maybe that's why you weren't trying as hard as I was.
I was just kind of like, I have rods in my back.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting hearing you talk about how like directly after the surgery, you felt more timid and kind of vulnerable. I wonder if part of that maybe was a function of being so quick to be diagnosed and get the surgery.
Yeah.
Versus for me, like the time leading up to the surgery, that like grueling kind of couple years where I was doing all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
I feel like that's when I did a lot of my like emotional, vulnerable, insecure work.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And by the time you got the surgery, you were kind of like, okay, I'm like, let's do this thing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm part bionic. Bring it on.
Yeah. And I think that's such an empowering way to look at it. And I think now I do. And now I feel like, my scar is something that like makes me different. It's something to appreciate. It like shows, the struggles that I have had to go through both emotionally and physically. And it's, I don't have any tattoos. I don't have any piercings. Like that's the one part of me that feels like different and sexy. Like I've made it feel like this sexy thing. And part of like even taking that photo. And I think like, for anyone who has recently had the surgery or even years ago, I think for me, taking photos of it in a way that was like very empowering, like almost sort of like doing like a boudoir shoot to like embrace your body, just getting some photos of the scar really helped like increase the connection and the relationship with that experience and was a way to like own it. Like, this is my body and it's something I went through with my body and like, I'm strong as shit.
Sure. Yeah. I like that. That's a great phrase. And I think, one of the things that's sort of coming out of this conversation for me is realizing that there are like such key similarities to any type of trauma or upsetting event, whether it's a surgery, diagnosis, whether it's being diagnosed with depression or scoliosis. And there is a process that people have to go through to integrate that event. And ours looked a little bit opposite and similar in some ways at different times. And just like the people that have emailed you who are kind of now contending with that, do I, don't I, should I, what are the benefits? Yeah. I think my biggest recommendation to them and to all of us is to be where you are now. How you feel will likely change, and that's good, and that's okay. And having that self-compassion, I think, is infinitely helpful to navigating any event.
I love your response to people there. And I think that almost kind of answers one of the questions that this reader has. She said, hi, I know it's really unlikely that you'll answer me. Well, here we are answering you.
Here we are.
But I also have scoliosis, and I got very lucky to have stopped growing right before I might have needed surgery. I'm 17, and it's still my biggest insecurity. How did you turn scoliosis into a positive outlook? Because I have a really hard time doing that.
Ooh.
So someone who didn't get the surgery but is still struggling with having scoliosis and not sure how to turn it into a positive outlook, how to embrace that. And I think you kind of touched on that a little bit, just about, taking yourself where you're at and understanding that that might change and that that's okay. That's a natural part of life, but also to understand that it's a very emotional journey as well. And to, care for yourself mentally and emotionally, just how you would physically with checking in with a doctor.
Yeah. I think that's definitely a great foundation for people to have. One of the things that I think is maybe a bit assumed, I don't really know, is that after you have the surgery, your body, scar notwithstanding, your body is in this perfect alignment.
Yeah.
And for me, that actually was not true. And it's for a variety of reasons that are sort of more specific to the type of surgery I had. Mm-hmm. But even since then, my ribs are not perfectly symmetrical.
Yeah.
Depending on how well stretched and kind of loose my fascia and muscles are, sometimes the misalignment is more pronounced. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that has really helped me kind of navigate that ongoing or at times physical insecurity is taking measures to address it, protect it, yoga, stretching, massage, all of those. And also to develop an identity that is detached from my physical appearance.
Yes. That's a whole nother episode right there.
Yeah, maybe.
That's very good. Yeah, I think too, that's a hard place to get to detach and have, a identity and relationship with yourself that is separate from your body. And I think for some people, those are inseparable, that how you identify yourself as a person is with your body.
Yeah. And
so that's really good, great feedback, actually.
Yeah.
It's a good challenge.
I consider it like with many things in life, it's a both and experience. We are our bodies and we are so much more.
Yes.
And who we are as a total person is in a Venn diagram, that area of overlap.
Yeah.
And so our role is always to, at least, I don't know, this was true for me, is to balance how much I define myself by my body and how I look, and how much is defined by those softer personality traits or character traits.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful notion, statement to walk away with, that, yes, you may experience this with your body, and you may struggle with it, and it may feel like at times your body's fighting against you. And, we just had an episode last week on eating disorders and, again, with our bodies, and being able to understand that we have a whole identity and that we bring so much more to the table than just our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, it's sort of years. It's been 16 years now for me of hindsight. And it's definitely been a process that's evolved. There are, just like with any, I don't know, physical whatever, there are better days where I feel, confident and sexy and aligned and whatever. And then there are days where I'm like, gosh, I really wish this wasn't an issue for me.
Yeah. There are some times where I'm like, I can't really bend backwards right now, and that'd be great to not feel like I'm just going to fall backward.
Yeah. How else am I going to win this limbo competition?
Yeah, right? But no, I think with that, being present with yourself, with where you are, and being compassionate with that, just being kind to yourself with how you talk to yourself with this struggle, with this part of your life.
Sure. How you talk to yourself, and I can't emphasize enough how you let other people talk to you and about you.
Yeah.
One of the things we didn't talk too much was about how even after the surgery, that was when I started getting a lot more comments, and not all of them were initially positive.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing where we can really empower adolescents, adults, anyone who is experiencing something like scoliosis, is how to teach other people how to treat them.
Yeah.
Right? How you treat yourself and how you let other people treat you. And we all have so much to offer beyond how we look. Yes. And sometimes it means sticking up for what we expect from other people.
Mm-hmm. That's so beautiful. Could not have said it better. Yeah, I think one thing, as we wrap up here that we didn't get to touch on a lot of is, it is more prevalent in females, but that males also struggle with this, and males are also diagnosed with it. Your brother, one of them. So he is proof that this does also happen with men.
Yes.
But there is one organization that I found, Curvy Girls Scoliosis.com, and they have all kinds of groups and chapters all throughout the nation for support groups.
Fantastic.
So if anyone is struggling out there with that, I did get a few messages, people asking, their sister is going to be getting it, or they have a friend who's struggling with it. And I think all of those sentiments and statements that you just said are super important for people to, embrace the conversation and to be positive about it and try to be empathetic if you can to what this person is experiencing, because it's a very, very personal thing. Mm-hmm. It's hard.
Yeah, definitely.
There's so much more that we could talk about with this topic. And I hope that I've been able to answer some questions from what you guys have commented and messaged me about in relation to scoliosis and my journey with it. And I'm sure that, Amira sharing her story has also been super helpful. So, thank you, Amira, for being so open and honest and sharing your story. I know it's going to resonate with people, and it means a lot that you're open and willing to be so vulnerable with this with me.
Oh, Taylor, thank you. I really can't thank you enough for letting me be on this podcast and to talk about this. I hope it is as meaningful for your listeners as it was for me to talk about. Yeah. And I really encourage, if anybody has any questions, to reach out to me, to you, to support groups. Let's literally talk about it.
Oh, I feel like that's been coming up almost every episode now, where it's like this cheesy little line, but it fits. It works.
It totally fits.
And that's why I named it this. Yeah. So if people did want to talk about this with you, how could they get in touch with you if someone wants to come see you for therapy or message you or do some research on you?
Do some research on No. I have since ended that part of my career.
Yes.
It stopped with the positive visualization of gold rope. But yes, if people want to get in touch with me, they can go to my website, AmiraWhitehill.com, or you can just Google me. You'll find my Psychology Today profile, or email me, Amira@AmiraWhitehill.com. I'm happy to talk more about scoliosis, therapy, how my approach to counseling may help you, and answer any other questions that you may have.
Yeah. And all of the research and stuff that we have done will be linked in the episode notes for you guys to check out as well. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of Let's Talk About It. We'll be back next week with another episode. Feel free to send us emails at ask.letstalkaboutit@gmail.com. You can also find the podcast on Instagram at Let's Talk About It _podcast.
This podcast is brought to you by Wave Podcast Network. Check out all of our shows, including the Brain Candy Podcast, I Don't Get It, Babes and Babies, Coffee Convos, and Let's Talk About It.